Fourth Vox Log of Arbites Investigative Alex Salernis, 890, 995, and 41. We maintained the stakeout until mid-morning before packing up Hilaire signal jammer and making our way back to the transit hub. Aside from the hourly patrols and another multi-truck weapons shipment arriving at midnight, nothing else of much note happened around Warehouse X827. By the time we got back to Griffin's hideout, the other three had, with Enos's help, unpacked a lot of the data that Garn had lifted from Saddleworth's cogitator banks. A lot of the messages had single-letter abbreviations of the senders' names, and there was information incriminating our good buddy Bragg as a middleman in the illicit trade of Xenos artifacts, too. I guess that wasn't sufficiently lucrative to keep him from dabbling in gun-running for seditionists, though. The good Navy captain, as haggard as ever, greeted the return of the stakeout team with an enthusiastic grunt before retiring in the late morning after having pulled another all-nighter himself. Some of the boys had a peek at his cogitator and noted reports of the RBD seizing Ometh's armory at the storefront. Ready to topple over myself, I shuffled off to my room as Tyor and Adap Garn started tittering over some of Halstrix's books. Bright Eyes was sawing logs by the time I got in, so I made some subtle adjustments to his airflow before collapsing on my own mattress. Coming to later in the afternoon, by the time I brewed a new pot of recaf and wandered out into the main chamber, some of Sphinx, that's what we've coined ourselves by the way, were already back at it, analyzing information on Norstrike's console. While the man himself had already hit the streets on another assignment, he'd left a new Vox recording that we collectively listened to once we were all collected. In it, he described some of the leads and conclusions he'd gathered from our little warehouse raid, the biggest of which was his conviction that Minor Prince Sienkov definitely knows more than an innocent man should. Enos urged us to confront the noble and drag a confession out of him one way or another. While a more subtle infiltration of the Sienkov household is possible, the captain urged us to take the most direct route and gain access to Iosif via our inquisitorial authority. He then begrudgingly offered the alternative of contacting a remote asset with which Griffin had worked previously, a 1-Spear-6, an off-world agent who operates independently, and who has embedded himself in Ramar Primus's high society. This operative could potentially provide us more clandestine access to a selection of this world's noble houses. After some deliberation, all of us in Sphinx decided to give that latter option a try, though we resolved not to notify any Griffin member, and Garn made the necessary arrangements for a rendezvous the next day. Before we logged off of the hideout's main cogitator, Draken made an absurd but brief appearance in his skivvies, after which Garn noticed that Norstrike's investigative annotations included the results on the plate search we'd queried after our return. Lorries from the 1700 delivery were registered from one of the minor hives, while the vehicles involved in the midnight transfer came out of Hive Ramar Secundus specifically. While not strictly helpful on its own, the information still contributes to a wider understanding of this plot's globe-spanning scope. Determined to improve our mobility throughout the city, Blackwater dragged us out in the late afternoon to go hit up some of the seediest used auto carriage dealerships in the Underhive. While it took him a few hours of price comparison and intense haggling, the man did indeed procure us an inconspicuous, if slightly dinged-up, ground car, in a feat of undeniable mercantile prowess. Piling in, and with plenty of time until our meeting with Spear 6 at 1000 the next morning, the cell motored back to X827 to take note of any additional deliveries. As we approached, a group of the same unmarked heavy lorries were pulling out of the warehouse's front gate, time 2200. Blackwater at the wheel, we whipped around in pursuit as they passed us by, each cab containing 2 occupants, and tailed them for the better part of an hour. Eventually passing outside of the hive's southeastern wall, down an enclosed exterior roadway, the trucks proceeded past a checkpoint and into a private satellite aerodrome several hundred meters outside of Primus's perimeter. Hilaire drove us up shortly afterwards, and we were promptly turned away by some grungy gangers manning the entrance after they compared our plates to a roster they had on hand. Haphazardly dressed, their only uniform seemed to be a standardized pattern of flak helmet. Pulling back a respectable distance down the tunnel, We kept the aerodrome entrance under observation as we began to work out the particulars of our next move. Once Garn rigged the Psyker's data slate to remotely transmit its location as a kind of makeshift homing beacon, the team decided to try to flag down any lorries coming out of the complex. Feigning mechanical trouble with our own vehicle, we hoped to slow them up long enough to allow Tyor a chance at planting the slate underneath one of the weapon shuttling vehicles. We heard the distinct rumble of a heavy lifter taking off from the drome at 0125, the reverberation shaking ice crystals down from the tunnel's ceiling. Suddenly, another ground car emerged from the hive and sped past us before turning around at the checkpoint. A few words from the driver was all it took for the goons to quickly pile in before he took off back towards the city. I noted this guard relief at 0147 on my chrono. With nobody manning the entrance now, we decided to dismount and investigate the gate while the coast was clear. I scoured the guard shack and found both the timetables for the guard shifts, which seemed to be provided by multiple gangs at the behest of some consortium collective, and a flight schedule that indicated the next arrival to be at 0300. With about an hour to spare and Hire conveniently having popped the lock open on the aerodrome gate at just that instant, we decided to poke around inside the satellite dome. Once inside, we observed the bustle of automated activity as dozens of servitors trundled back and forth across the rock-reed apron. A single source of sentience, I use the term loosely here, was revealed to be an Ogren in blue Navy fatigues. He was busying himself in an attempt to refine the movements of his mindless charges. A trio of Valkyrie gunships with aeronautica markings were also visible, their wing pylons laden with ordnance. Sticking to the shadows, we poked around in some of the freight containers around the perimeter of the enclosure, finding heavy munitions and aviation fuel for those very same flyers. A solitary automated traffic control tower jutted up from the middle of the dome, centered beneath the hulking hatches that provided access to the blizzard-choked skies outside. Garn looked at the spire appraisingly, but reluctantly refrained from attempting a data scoop in case his tampering set off alarms. Unsatisfied but out of time, we exfiltrated the aerodrome, carefully locking everything up behind ourselves, and returned to Hilaire's ride down the tunnel. After the 3 o'clock arrival, once again audible, the entrance to the port opened up, and a convoy of more lorries led by a Taro armored carrier emerged. All of these vehicles were painted in Imperial Navy livery, and as we flagged the column down as part of our planned distraction, they began to disgorge a mass of naval armsmen. Blackwater was able to give a convincing show regarding our purported breakdown, and the terse NCO that stormed up to him dispatched one of his mechanics to get our vehicle operational and out of his way. I tried to pry the sergeant for any little shred of information as he stood there impatiently, but the guy had little to say besides insults. Standard void-born pompousness, especially common in the Navy's more senior ratings. I know the type. Tyor got the modified data slate affixed to one of the trucks, the perimeter of armsmen paying little attention to their rear. Once he disappeared from sight and our auto carriage's issue resolved itself, we pulled out of the tunnel and the convoy got back underway. Tailing it for some time, it became evident that the transponder was working just as Hire had hoped. Eventually, the Taro and trucks passed through a militarum checkpoint deeper in the hive, and we took this opportunity to peel off and begin making our way towards the meeting with Spear 6 within the Metal Workers Guild halls. Arriving there on one of the northern streets of 41 innings, ahead of schedule but just in time for breakfast, the Corsair and myself began plying the crowd of workers in the guild cafeteria. We heard murmuring of increased quotas and longer hours in anticipation of the upcoming renegotiation ceremony, which I took to mean the royal elections. There were also rumors regarding a supposed acquisition of the guild, itself ranked in the 20,000s, planned by the Grand Prince himself, Kir Folov. I get the impression that such a dealing is uncommon for someone of such a high station. Finally, the cell met with the independent asset in a nearby storage annex at the pre-appointed time. Spear 6 appeared as a stooping, cautious figure, his face swaddled in bandages and any exposed skin looking gray and sickly. Garn later mentioned that the man had obviously been exposed to dangerous firm levels. He explained that his cover on Ramar was that of a medicae specializing in the concoction and administering of pharmaceutical chemicals, and that his services were well regarded amongst the nobles of the upper hive. Our team talked over several methods of approach, Spear 6's original offer being that of disguising us as medical orderlies in his employ, but settled on the idea of attending an audience with Sienkov, arranged by our new contact, as a rogue trader and his retinue. Blackwater naturally playing the titular role. Spear 6 will provide us with the documentation needed for the audience, along with more expensive fineries for our disguises, in a dead drop soon. As we made to leave, he implored the cell not to undermine his own cover here on Ramar. Apparently he's been establishing himself here for some time. Just as we filed out of the storage annex, Blackwater heard something impact one of the crates behind us. Doubling back to investigate, he then caught up with us and revealed a curious golden pin, styled as a Medicaeus caduceus. There had also been a small scrawling attached to it, reading Ordo Xenos Kiplov, Prokov 3. Wherever this Spear 6 comes from, he's most certainly served the Inquisition in the past. In Vox Log.